Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Great to be here at the University of Georgia Museum of Art. Wonderful to have the museum all to ourselves here. And want to thank, first of all, the Georgia Museum of Art for opening up and hosting us here in this incredible space. And I want to thank the Willson Center for the Humanities, of course, at the University of Georgia for all it does and all they do with the Spotlight in the Arts series, as well as everything else throughout the academic calendar year. We wouldn't know what to make of humanities at the University of Georgia without the Willson Center. So thank you all very much. A real pleasure and too rare pleasure for me to be here tonight to speak with my old time friend and former student, Dr. Jeff Fallis, who is also now serving as the inaugural first ever Poet Laureate of Athens, Georgia, which is an awesome thing for everybody. I can't think really of a person more perfectly suited to that post, man. Really, really great. So I just want to welcome everybody to who's looking live, and we'll see this after we're all gone. But Jeff is a person that I'm constantly texting and emailing, talking about we got to get together to talk, and because of the vicissitudes of life and the demands of schedules, we rarely do it. So here we are, and we get to do it. I'm really, really happy and excited about it.
An empty art gallery.
We're going to do it. So to just briefly introduce Jeff, Jeff is a doctor of philosophy in English and creative writing. I think probably from about 4 years ago, I think maybe 2016, 17?
2015.
15?
Yeah.
And before that was an undergrad student in English department, I know, as well as other places on the University of Georgia campus, I'm sure, during the 1990s. Did an MFA at the University of Virginia, and then came back to Athens to do his Ph.D. work with us. Since he's worked at Georgia Tech, I know, and at Milledge College, yeah?
Georgia College.
Georgia College in Milledgeville.
Yeah.
For the last year.
Or that's the last 3 months.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So has, and also born and raised in Georgia. Yeah. Where in Georgia?
Marietta was where I was born.
Born and raised in Marietta, Georgia. So really a kind of native son of the area, of the region for sure, in the state. And I don't have a formal introduction for Jeff. It doesn't seem even appropriate. And nor do the degrees I listed haphazardly just now really tell the story. The real story is Jeff Fallis is just one of the most capaciously knowledgeable and open, intellectual, creative people I've ever known. He seems to have seen and heard every film, knows the dates of production of every album, owns them all in streaming devices as well as in vinyl. He is a DJ, I know, and a connoisseur of the best of popular arts, as well as the literary arts, even graphic arts, but just a really, really amazingly well-versed and voracious student of the creative arts themselves, for all they are and for all they do. This was right away apparent when we met years ago, and I've been continually amazed at where did you come up with all this knowledge. And the second part of it is, I've frankly, let me say, I've known a good number of people who know a lot about the world in various ways. But with a few exceptions, I really can't think of very many, maybe one handful, that kind of wear that knowledge and acquire that knowledge and share that knowledge with the kind of generosity and ease and graciousness that Jeff Fallis does, which I think is part of why I think he's such an ideal person for this role as the Poet Laureate in Athens. He's just remarkable how he kind of wears it and how he walks it, and I really, really admire it. So a wonderful occasion for me to be with you, Jeff, and to speak to you all about my good friend and former student. And we want to listen to him read some of his poems here for 20, 25 minutes or so. And then after that, I'll step back in the frame and we can sit and we can have one of these long delayed conversations.
All right.
All right.
Sounds good. Thank you,
Awesome.
Ed. I
Yep.
appreciate it.
Yep.
All right. So I'll
Ladies
stand
and
up
gentlemen,
here.
Jeff Fallis.
All right. Okay. Oh, I need this one. This is good? Okay. I thought I'd start off with reading a poem that's not by myself. And last year, early last year, early 2020, I was contacted by the brother of a poet in Athens, John Seawright, who, died in 2001 at the age of 44 and was a huge part of the Athens scene in the 80s and 90s. And they're trying to put together a collection of his poems. And so they asked me to write, and also his nonfiction. He wrote kind of historical things. He did all sorts of things. He was very much, kind of a Renaissance, type of figure. But they wanted me to write about his poems. And so I spent most of last year thinking about them and trying to write an introduction to them, and then thinking about where he fit into sort of Athens cultural history, and I thought a lot about the poets in Athens and how, compared to the music and art scene, the poetry scene was kind of just unrecorded in lots of ways and unremarked on. And so I don't think I would have applied to be the poet laureate if I hadn't spent all that time last year thinking about John Seawright, who they called the unofficial poet laureate of Athens, in the 80s or 90s. And so I've been thinking a lot about his work, and hopefully at some point in the next year or so, all of his poems and all of his work will be collected and will come out as a book. So fingers crossed on that. But I thought I would read one of John's poems, John Seawright's poems. And this it seemed appropriate for a night when the full moon is up over Athens and over Georgia. And I love this poem because its title is better than any title I've ever come up with for any poem. It's called A Dog to Its Vomit. Cold instead of air, gold and smoke, no fire, smoke breathed up from the dirt, from falsely remembered fires. Ghost towns run live foxes bell, their masters in moonlight in a darkened church. The moon is bigger than the sky. Georgia is bigger than the world. And so, yeah, it seemed appropriate for tonight. And now I'll read some of my poems. And this one is called, it's not as good a title as A Dog to Its Vomit, but it's an okay title. It's called Trying to Catch a Lightning Bug with a Stubborn, Desperate, Greasy Hog. There are melodies, little snatches of music so beautiful that once heard or imagined, it will make your own teeth ache, make your own skin feel like a borrowed suit. The porcelain in the bathroom will crack, the trees swaying in the late golden light will crumble. You will forget yourself. You'll get caught up in the rush and current of the air like a bumblebee in a crosswind, and it will be gone. And you'll spend weeks and months hankering away, trying to explain it to people, to hum it in the shower, catch the skittery flutter of its spine and sinew in your water-damaged fingers. All restraint, all decorum, all dignity tossed aside. Calluses, beer bellies, credit card difficulties will develop. Your xylophone player will leave you in desperation. Your liver will hurt you as you pull away from a 7-Eleven somewhere in the 70s smear of middle America. You'll struggle with the chords, with the effort. You'll start to annoy acquaintances you meet at after parties. You'll start to drift when you drive. The melody will visit you in a dream and abandon you again to the ruthlessness of the morning with an empty feeling in your stomach and a trail of blackberries and blood on your pillow. The spirit of the thing will elude you, will dart and dip and sputter and vanish and allow you to grasp it for a single mercury-sick moment, vertiginous and wild, before disappearing again into the premature grease of early evening. And so this poem I thought I would read. I feel like in part I owe it to Ed for wanting to write about this. I think it was one of my former classmates, I think Lily Brown, was writing this little essay, and it was about like a very specific thing, that was, I think it was like an essay about liking like a whole album or something in high school or something. And remember you talking to her about encouraging you to like, there's very specific things about like, you as a person and your age and your generation, and you should like write about that and figure out like these very specific things. And so I thought about that, and then I had kind of wanted to write something about DJing, and I realized that like when I started DJing, which was when I lived in Charlottesville, Virginia, around 2001, 2002, my golden age of DJing was sort of an era no one talks about. And it was like sort of, after vinyl, before sort of like digital, sort of DJing. And so I was toting milk crates full of CDs and like mixed CDs and stuff like to, this little, I started DJing. It was a club that was an indie rock club that was also a sushi restaurant called Tokyo Rose in Charlottesville. And I DJ'd there for a couple of years, but this is sort of about that experience. And like I said, I've never read anything about it. I think most people, if they DJ during this era, are embarrassed by it. So I try to write about it. And it's called CD, DJ CD. Milk crates double stacked with compact discs and jewel cases, lugged from venue to venue. Radio Shack mixer, wad of cables. I feel protected from the crowd by the array of physical objects surrounding me. I carry multiple flashlights. The search for the right track is bodily and thrilling, an anxious, erotic terror of delayed gratification and vibrating intuition. Frantic scanning, sour flop sweat under my arms, above my pursed lips. The failures are visceral and devastating, but the moments when my suspicions find immediate recognition in the swaying arms and unified undulations of bodies as body on the dance floor are the purest, most gratifying expressions of community I will ever find. I glance up and smile, and then dive back into the overpacked crates, flip through track listings, worry over skipping CD players. My golden era of DJing falls into the comically narrow, completely unremarked epoch just after vinyl's reign and just before the full arrival of the ethereal digital. No one cares, but I'm still in thrall to the thrill of the finger on the spine, glint of light on the curve of the disc, the density of the material. And the next two poems are list poems. For a certain period when I was writing, I was really sort of interested in the idea of kind of just found poems or list poems and just kind of things I would kind of encounter in my, questing for things and collecting things and finding out things. And I tried to write some poems of these, and these are kind of, I imagine, I conceive of these poems as kind of evil twins in a way. So I'll start with the more evil and kind of darker of the two, and then we'll kind of go to one that's a little more joyous. This poem is from, take almost everything in it. I think at least 90% of it is taken from an essay by the music writer Greil Marcus that's called, I think it's called Rock Deaths in the 70s. And he wrote it in like 1979, 1980, just kind of looking at, sort of the wreckage of what had happened to so many musicians from the 60s and 70s, and just kind of listing the ways in which a lot of them died. And so I think I took a lot of that article and made it into that essay, took it into, wrote a poem out of it. And it's called Rock Deaths. Like I said, it's after Greil Marcus. Ham sandwich, food poisoning, own vomit, plane crash, car crash, motorcycle crash, bicycle crash, slit wrists, suicide by shotgun blast, suicide by hanging, carbon monoxide poisoning, leap from hotel window, leap in front of subway train, natural causes, overdose of pills, heart disease, double suicide with mother, brain tumor, defenestration, erotic asphyxiation, victim of hit and run driver, boating accident, Russian roulette, diabetes, suicide after murdering lover, fire, alcoholism, hepatitis, heroin overdose at hands of another, heroin, shot, malnutrition, stabbed, mob execution, stabbed in front of own home, shot in own home, multiple drug overdose after lifetime of professed clean living, murdered, electrocuted by guitar in own home, electrocuted by microphone on stage, alcoholism, electrocuted by guitar in studio, shot to death by Los Angeles police in justifiable homicide, shot to death by own father, cirrhosis, throat cancer, heart failure, drug use aggravated by trauma of earlier on-stage electrocution, cancer, brain tumor, heart failure during surgery, ambushed in van and shot to death on return from show in Belfast, accidental overdose, boating accident, brain tumor allegedly caused by fall downstairs, cerebral hemorrhage after fall downstairs, beaten to death in Chicago bar because of long hair. So his next poem follows the same pattern, a little cheerier, but also drawn from music history. And so this was literally came from my record collection. And so there was after I was, I never really made the successful transition as a DJ from CDs to, DJing through a laptop or anything like that. But I did transition eventually to DJing just using 45s. And I was collecting a lot of them and kind of DJing with them regularly. And I was going through these and was just amazed at the incredible profusion of names of record labels, American record labels on all these 45s I had, and then kind of did more research, but they were just, the names were fascinating and I felt like they warranted their own poem. So this poem was just called American Record Labels, and that's all it is. SPQR, Bamboo, New Voice, Playmore, Lost Night, T-Net, Golden Wing, Silver Fox, Redbird, Clock, Mirko, Double Shot, Duke, Monument, Swan, Challenge, Ember, Sussex, Dolphin, Smash, Specialty, King, Dial, Dimension, Liberty, Cadence, Cadet, VJ, Delphi, Double L, Big Top, Volt, High, Josie Congress, Amy, Crimson, Dunes, Herald, Moonglow, Milestone, Rick Tick, Class, Imperial, Wand, Roulette, Boardwalk, Scepter, Soul, Fire, Cat, Cub, Ovation, Parrot, Lupine, Liberty, Demon, Planet, Tough, Jubilee, Ascot, Fortune, 4th and Broadway, Westbound, End, Federal, Chess, Checker, Checks, Sun, Mustang, 4-Star, R&B, Fury, Rampart, Instant, Apt, Coral, Star Day, Groove, Chancellor, Calico, Dot, Bell, Instant, Legrand, Indigo, Madison, Apollo, Gamble, Dutone, Infinity. And these next two poems are also a pair, and they're both about streets in Athens. And when I first moved away, from Athens a little bit, about 20 years ago now, I think, so I lived in London for a bit, I lived in Charlottesville for a bit, and I lived in San Francisco a bit. And somewhere in that era, I think I was trying to write these poems about Athens and was kind of using places to crystallize around. So these are both about streets in Athens, and the first one's called Barber Street. It was the boom before the bust. Everybody talked in loose code, monosyllables, detached observations. Gin flowed in copious tears. Pinatas got destroyed by vintage Fords the color of fresh blood. Days ran together like sloppy watercolors. You wake up morning after a party to find the bartender's cousin asleep on the front porch swing without any pants on. Streamers fluttered, hearts fractured, croquet games flared and fizzled. Everything was lit by electricity. The floorboard shook, furniture got broken, strangers danced themselves unconscious. Don't you see? I loved everyone. And this poem, I didn't think about it at the time, but it's sort of become a historical monument in a way. It's called Over Wilkinson Street, and I think they tore down the trestle that my friend used to live on that street, and I remember climbing up there with a book one day, I don't know why, and just kind of looking out and sitting and thinking about things, and I think thinking about that experience a couple years later and writing about it, about being kind of suspended, up on that trestle. And then I drove by, I think one day earlier this year, this summer, and it was gone, and it made me sad. But this poem exists, and it commemorates it. So that's one thing poems can be good at. So it's called Over Wilkinson Street. Half me wants to throw myself back down to the pavement and shatter my skull like a star or an egg. Half me wants to keep ascending into the blue sprawl and live there forever, like a transmutated doo-wop singer with a slit throat and missing arm. Instead, to be unable to speak, absolutely in love with something I cannot name, so alive, the unbreathable air around me is a clean white suit stitched together from scraps of light. And so this next poem, it's not an Athens poem. I think it's a New Orleans poem, or a New Orleans of the spirit type poem. It's called Carnival Time, and it's for two of the New Orleans musicians who wrote the best Mardi Gras songs, carnival songs, for Al Johnson and Professor Longhair. The splendid summer after the storm will be a live oak, the hard ripe part of a fruit. There will be dancing in the Capitol, a fusillade of fireworks over the great flexed elbow of the river. Souls, hubcaps, marbles, gem socks, stray dogs, mittens, all will be returned to their rightful owners. The wild silver sound of the trumpets we heard at the house party will be the only music we steer by. We will play our carnival songs to their raucous, loose-limbed ends. Let's play them together, free form. Let's say the spirits of blues in translation. And this poem is called August Beasts, or someone thought it was August's Beasts, at one point. Maybe it works. Either way, I was thinking about the month. I think that I wrote it a very, specific date, but I like August, or, as well as August. So I like that it works both ways. This is another, Athens poem. August Beast. Yesterday was the birthday of the band's debut EP release. Today is the birthday of the poet, whose approval I wanted, but never quite received. He mumbled in a courtly fashion. Virgos are fussy. We are on the cusp of an entirely different curriculum. The first tree is starting to tint orange and yellow. The cicadas are silent again for how many more years? All I want to do is sleep like a luxuriant beast for days and weeks that swap places with each other. Rain again all night again, brain again all day. If I put my foot into the mirror of the puddle, the brace of the vivid cold will shock me awake. I receive a package in the middle of the legitimate mystery of this afternoon. It is ridiculous to believe the world is flat. I can feel it curve away from me as I try to stand here still and calm. That was a sonnet too. I forgot to mention that. So yeah, I didn't realize it was a sonnet till I finished it, but it was a sonnet. And this poem is about, it's kind of stitched together from what had originally been 4 or 5 or 6 different poems. And yeah, it's called Punctures. And there's, I don't know, I feel like I look back and like I said, I was trying to figure out what to do with all these little poems, and I tried to put them together. And I think in a lot of my poems, there's this idea of like sometimes it's like a wound or a puncture or a slash. Something happens and something else kind of gets in, you know what I mean? And sometimes it's like a personal wounding. Sometimes it's like, it seems like it's something that's happened kind of outside of me. But so I tried to piece them together, and hopefully that conceit holds it together. But it's called Punctures. The night is old silk. I'm wearing a pink shirt. I fold my body into the green space of the river. I crest and break again into the troubled, untroubled waters. I bite my thumb and see the blood run red and purple. I've discovered the secret knot at the center of my body, where future and past are braided together. The silver smoke of my own breath, the streak of scarlet in the hollow at the bottom of your neck, the ache in the air in the last 3 hours of summer, the native motion of the soul is circular. When a bruise is a dark flower, a hand on the small of the back, driving through crushed leaves at twilight, voice like rope and burgundy. My blood pressure is high all the time, by choice. Wild-eyed horses speak to me in perfect poems and sentences. Clouds are fat plums flushed with water. Jasmine buds are flames alive. Wisteria, a hive of opened eyes, and the sun shines through the crack in the ceiling of the sky. I'll read this little one. I wrote a lot of poems about Marvin Gaye, and I've kind of, this is one of the ones I still like and hold on to. And this is just, I think doo-wop came up in another poem, and I'm a big doo-wop fan. And this poem's about, I think when Marvin Gaye started singing, you would hear doo-wop on the street in Washington, DC. And I think that was when he, besides his experience of, I think the church, some of his first experience singing, doing secular singing, I guess, was this experience with doo-wop. So Marvin Gaye hears doo-wop for the first time, Washington, DC, 1950. And this poem is a villanelle. It fell from the heavens and hit him between the ears, the blue dappled harmonies, the moonlight in the chapel, the luxuriant pain. It soared out of the radio and opened its arms in the air. Little Marvin, with his eyes closed, wills himself to disappear into the pure river of song streaming from the soda fountain. It fell from the heavens and hit him between the ears with its declarations to the forever beloved and its overwrought army of tears. He pledges himself to the nonsense syllables, loses himself in the refrains. It soared out of the radio and opened its arms in the air. It stole its way into his evenings. It threw him down the stairs. He skipped school to sing on the street corner in the rain. It fell from the heavens and hit him between the ears like a single spine of lightning, like a whole new hemisphere. He prays to it. He worships it, prostrates himself again and again. It soared out of the radio and opened its arms in the air. How are we to know what determines us? How can we hear our own voices at the end of the album? How can we finally explain? It fell from the heavens and hit him between the ears. It soared out of the radio and opened its arms in the air. And I think these are a couple of different, a trio of elegies, I guess. I waited my whole life to see Prince play. And I think one of the first records I remember owning, was Purple Rain, and some of my earliest memories of sort of a musician as such, or memories of Prince. And I had a chance to see him probably around 2004, 2005, and I didn't take it. And then that was stupid, and I had a couple other times like I should have gone, I couldn't afford it or something. And then finally, 2016, they announced early 2016, Prince is coming to Atlanta. Prince, piano, microphone. And I usually don't have good luck getting concert tickets, but I logged on and I got, I think, 4th or 5th row tickets. And I was like, amazing. I was very overjoyed. I was so happy. I was finally getting to see Prince at the Fox Theater in Atlanta. And I went, and it was the last concert Prince ever played. He played 2 shows that night, and I had the tickets to the last show, and he was dead a couple weeks later. And it took me a while 3 or 4 years to kind of, sort of digest that and write something about it. And so I finally did. And this is called The Last Prince Concert, Fox Theater, Atlanta, 2016. April 14th, same night Lincoln got shot and the Titanic hit the iceberg. 4 planets in retrograde, show delayed a week already. Cycles of the moon emblazoned across his purple silk pajamas. The scepter he walked with, not an affectation, but an affirmation of his majesty. A talisman against the agony in his knees and hips, for which he was taking black market fentanyl, likely during the same astonishing 90 minutes I spent under a faux sky of twinkling yellow stars, listening to him force himself to be vulnerable in front of strangers who were affected by his final strangeness and singularity in ways they could never quite articulate, in ways they would wake up to years later, feeling both an absence and expansion of the world they felt and believed in. A rain that breathes, a snow that falls upward, a new spectrum of color, equal parts light, sound, electric intercourse, and water. And this poem is for a good friend of mine who lived in Athens, in the 90s and was in several bands. He died right after I left Athens for the first time, around this time of year, November 1999. And I was living in London at the time and got the news, and then wrote this poem about Peter, and it's named after television, the New York kind of punk band, their first album. It's called Marquee Moon, and their song is Marquee Moon. And I think Peter is one of the people who introduced that music to me. So this poem's for him. Marquee Moon for Peter Smith, 1976 to 1999. Those halcyon days, all I did was drink and watch Hitchcock movies. Bivouacked in your living room, transient. I still got confused when I woke at night. The evenings were chilly. The backyard sloped down to the creek bed. All the furniture had gone different shades of yellow. You'd come home from your girlfriends every 4 or 5 days, and we'd sit and talk in the sunlight like 2 old men in the lobby of a hotel. We spun stones and yardbirds, swapped gossip about old bluesmen, watched the ice in our glasses melt. Sometimes when you were gone, I'd just stand in your room amazed. No bed, only a pillow on the floor, all those albums lined up against the wall. Disabled amplifiers sat with their guts spilling out of them. Guitar necks longed for bodies and strings. Tools were scattered like ashes. Everything waited for you to minister to its disconnectedness. Everything felt alive and dead. And in the closet, your shirts and pants rested on the same metal hangers, the finest wardrobe in town, blues, brown, blues. A photograph I saw months later, you in your corduroy jacket, hair blonde as an old coin, lifting 2 fingers into something like a great beyond. Night I got the news, London was raw and ugly. The next night it snowed but didn't stick. That night it was just cold and wet. I already had plans, so I kept them. Rode the tube to Brixton with the wind knocked out of me, found the club by accident. What happened? I don't know what happened. I drank a double whiskey for you. Backstage they were playing television, you'd have liked that. I got lost on the night bus. Trafalgar Square lit up like an open air cathedral, all those drunks changing routes and yelling at each other. I got stuck on Oxford Street for an hour, didn't roll home till after 5. Is it oblivion or Valhalla, Pete? In bed, I cried till my chest hurt. And you won't snap your fingers again. Won't talk with your hands, won't stand on the South Bank feeling lonely, won't go to matinees, won't eat fish, won't change brake pads, won't have children, won't get the mail, won't shoot up, won't nod out, won't turn the wrong color in the back of a van, won't wake up in morning's arms with a day in front of you like 2-lane blacktop. Or will you? Will I run across your eyes in someone else's face, glimpse by accident your silhouette gliding across Prince Avenue, shuffling under the slash network of the half-dark sky? So Peter, I give you this, but I know it's not enough. You deserve an offering greater than what I can extend, something like an undiscovered city on the moon, a stack of LPs cut loose from gravity, a clean white bed by a dirty river. And a couple more. And this is probably one of the newest poems here. And this is for David Berman, the lead singer of the Silver Jews and Purple Mountains and author of one of my favorite books of American poetry the last 30 or 40 years, Actual Air, his only book of poems. He died in 2019. And again, it took a while to process that, think about how to write about him. And eventually I was going back and listening to his records and really interested in his bizarre concept of God that comes out in the last songs on a couple of his albums. And this is for him, for David Clown Berman. I met him in Amherst, Massachusetts once. I drove up from Virginia to see him read, and he was so gracious and kind and funny, and drew a little, cartoon, I think, of me on the book I gave him. And so this is for him, and it's called Slanted Blossoms Where the Angel Puked. I don't know how to talk to God. Is she working the door, or is she the door? I'm a flaw in the iris of her flawless hazel eye. Springtime is so perfect, I dream the same thing, I wake. I don't know how to talk to God, but I listen to the hiss of passing satellites and the syncopated throbbing in my wrists. Is the world a degraded mirror, or the slanted blossoms of God's bliss? Oh, come let us adore this grass. An angel vomited profusely here in 1763. The minor haunts the major, and the true nightmare is unrelenting consciousness without the grace of dream and sleep. God is just a series of sounds that hold the sandwich of the world together. If I knew her true name, I would pray it in the long honey of evening and let all else willow into silence. So I'll read you a couple other prayers, I guess, in a way. This is, again, a newish poem called My Prayer is a Hermetology. My prayer is a hermetology. It has grown inward unto upon itself like a tree the wind refuses to touch. My prayer passes through the reed of a vibrating oboe and sits abrasively on my tongue. I'm afraid to speak it. It is a wild hermetical sprawl. It resists my room of understanding. My prayer can only be sung in the lobby of a failing hotel. My prayer oozes with feathers, floats free from the offal that produced it. It is a face full of rain, a suspended exhaustion, a permission to expand and recover. The moon is a sand dune in an eroded galaxy of faith, and it is my duty to imagine a new wound on the face of this undiscovered planet. And so I got the last thing I'm going to read I wrote this weird poem earlier this year in the winter, and I called it Gospel Acceptance Speech, and it took the weird form of like an acceptance speech for someone getting an award. I think the first one was sort of an award someone didn't really want, and it quoted from a couple different things, and then I just kind of for that week or a couple of weeks there, just before I would go to sleep, I just wrote some of these, and then would look back a couple of days later and see if there were a couple of ones that were interesting. And so this is the one that seems like it stood the test of time the best. I should probably pick this up again, but this one's called Gospel Acceptance Speech number 5. I want to dedicate this award to the glass of water I hold in my left hand. It was once in your body, and once in the body of a gray dog in Alsatia, and once in the flesh that hung off the aged Cleopatra, and once in a dense cloud. I'm going to drink this water on stage tonight and ask you to remember its intelligence and versatility, its vast, staggering humility. Ice chokes the blasted hills of Nashville. The songwriter sleeps on a waterbed full of transmogrified jewels that once astonished the ancient city of Alexandria. Water seeks its level and is always returning to the sea. Thank you. All right. Sit down. Thanks. All right. Oh.
All right.
All right.
Well, thanks for that, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you.
Just great to hear it. Great to hear you. I was standing back there, watching and listening, and so many things streaming through based on what you're reading, and I'm wondering, was that, where does that line break? I hope he has that word at the end of that line. Technical things, but then, I think memories of previous times we were together, and also, to be kind of reacquainted or introduced again, or offered up things, people like Marvin Gaye and Prince, of course, so many others. I was listening to the litany of cause of death, and I'm thinking, okay, yeah, there's Otis, there's Donnie, there's Marvin. So just thankful again for the things we have in common, and also things that you introduced me to. And I'm keeping a list of things that go off in those poems that I don't know, and I'd like to look up. So quite a tour. And also I was thinking, gosh, who does this? Like who reads poems and 1, 2, 3 people listen?
I don't know. I liked it though. So,
I totally loved it. I was thinking, how can we arrange for this to happen again and again? Pair people up and get them to come out here, and ideally you would read and then the other person would read and you listen, but just alone in a great room like this. So there might be other great rooms we could do it in.
I like it. Yeah, it was great. So, and I haven't, like I said, I hadn't done a reading in a long time. So this was
and
great.
who had ever done a reading like this?
Yeah, I don't know. And then I know everyone here, so, and I've known you all for a long time. So there's a weird dreamlike element to it, that I enjoyed. So yeah.
Really awesome. I had no idea what to expect from this kind of thing, and it was really powerful. Yeah. Which is partly the novelty of this occasion, but also really in no small way, man, about the excellence of your work. And it's come some distance even since I've known you, and I think the newer poems, they show a certain kind of itinerary, a certain kind of journey. And so I'd like to ask you a little bit about that.
About
just how, during the now decades that you've been writing, from the time you were a student, I want to ask, like, or maybe even before you were in college, I don't know, what do you remember about like your first acquaintance with poetry that is you still recognize as an acquaintance with poetry?
I think, that's a good question. And I always wanted to be a writer. I think I remember like wanting to be a writer as far back, as I could remember in school. And I think I remember I won some award when I was like really young, like kindergarten, first grade. And I was like, okay, so I'm like, I can write, that's good. And then I think it was probably, I do remember though that I would try to write stories and I would sometimes get sidetracked or having trouble like sustaining them. And I think I would remember just being really interested sometimes in like language, you know what I mean? Or like certain kind of like, I think I remember I would like try to describe, I'll get hung up on description and sometimes lose the thread of the story I was trying to tell. And then I think at some point later, yeah, like I don't know exactly what, but maybe sometime in middle school or something like that, I sort of was introduced to what like a poem was. And I was like, okay, that might be the type of writing that I might be better at, you know, or something, you know, and it was just, and I think it was mainly just because there was something, I don't know if it was just something that was not strictly a narrative. It was some other type of writing. And I think it might have been description. I'm not even sure if I even had like the conception of what language was in this way, but there was something about it that like, I just remember being like hung up on describing something or maybe even how something kind of sounded, and then realizing that might be sort of more what poetry was. And then and then just kind of bizarrely, there was this contest that we were encouraged to enter in seventh or it must have been eighth grade for me. And it was like the National Young Writers Contest. And I wrote this poem, and, you know, it was sort of looking back on it, it was kind of like almost not like a Ginsberg beat type thing, but sort of like that, with just sort of these long kind of paragraphs of images and stuff. And it was about patriotism, you know, whatever. It was like 1990, 91. I don't know what it was about. And I entered it in the contest, and it won the contest the next year, won the national contest. And so I think that was, and then I ended up like,
see, I don't know any of this.
Yeah. And so I won the national,
like you're
writers,
14 or something.
13, 14. Yeah. And then, so I won this contest, and I got to go to Chicago for something. It was the first time I'd been on an airplane.
Right.
And then the most exciting thing was, and I don't know how this happened, but they were going to publish it. I don't know how it happened, but somehow I ended up the poem got published in this coffee table book called Georgia on My Mind that Jimmy Carter was writing the foreword for. And since I was in Atlanta, he was in Georgia.
Right.
They did a promotional thing. And so in 1991, I appeared on Good Morning America with Jimmy Carter. Yeah. And it was me at my most awkward. Like if you could peg like a 2 or 3 month period, that's like your most awkward pubescent. Right. That's me. And that's why I haven't watched it probably since 1992, 93. It's somewhere at my parents' house on VHS.
No doubt.
But it was weird because I was on TV with him, and I didn't get any money, but my middle school got all this money out of it. And then I appeared on, I was on like the front of the Marietta, all these things. Right. And so I guess that was sort of, I was like, well, I guess I can write a poem. You know, which was good and bad, because I think it kind of, I mean, I might have peaked early. You know what I mean? So I might have peaked at like 13 or 14.
So you write a poem and you end up on Good Morning America. That's just how it goes for everybody.
And it was just the weirdest thing, because I mean, it was kind of like this, where I was just sitting there, and I remember I had to get up, go to the Carter Center in Atlanta, and be there at like 5 in the morning or something. Right. Then we were on, and then Jimmy Carter just shows up 7-8 minutes before we go on the air, and he like was with these Secret Service guys who'd just been jogging. He's all sweaty, and I was like, "We're about to go on TV." He's like, "Don't worry, Jeffrey, it'll be." And he just like goes and then comes back totally dressed in like 30, almost like Superman. It was like he just like spun around. Anyway, I mean, but he was really great, but I just remember how surreal it was. Like I just kept thinking about some person somewhere just like eating breakfast, watching TV the whole time I was on there, and it just was.
That is crazy.
But so that I think made me, I don't know, I guess, more interested in poetry. Kind of, it was a lot of attention directed to me at an age when I don't think I really wanted it. Right. And so I kind of wasn't writing poems, or was doing it kind of secretly. And then I think I felt like I kind of, by the time I got to school here, I felt like I'd gotten very shy. And I think looking back on it, probably was all that attention at an age when I didn't want attention. It might have turned me more introspective and turned inward than I would have. But then I think by the time I got to here, to Athens and to UGA, I was writing these things. I didn't really know what they were. And then I took classes with Coleman Barks and Kevin Young. I think they both kind of just totally opened up my sense of what a poem was, you know? And then, I think I took a class with Coleman first, and he just I had to submit something and I was just kind of dreading it. And he just really was like, no, these parts are good, and made me kind of read it a couple times. And then when I took classes with Kevin Young, he just totally like opened up the world for me, and I think really encouraged me and, tried to direct me to lots of different types of poems. But then, that's a long prehistory answer.
That's
but
really interesting.
Yeah. But I think for me, it was looking back on a lot of like the poems I wrote my teen years, 20s, like a lot of the things. I mean, and probably like maybe 2 of the poems I just read are date from that far back. I mean, I think I wrote poetry to kind of try to encapsulate things. Otherwise, I was having trouble expressing, or felt kind of irreconcilable in my life. And I sort of felt like I would be at these sort of moments of whatever external or internal tension that I didn't know how to navigate any other way. And that's when I wrote a poem, and I felt like that would sort of help me get through it. And that's a pretty intense way to write poems, but I felt like I did that for a while. And then I kind of had to, probably by the time I met you, I felt like I was having to negotiate. I needed to negotiate another way to kind of write things that was less, I don't know,
fraught,
less fraught. And I think just kind of bring other like aspects of like me and my life, and
right? Poetry can't be a thing you only do it at your worst.
Yeah, right. When
you have no other options.
Right.
Either I jump or I write this poem.
Yes.
Yeah. I think poetry often starts that way for people, and it sometimes ends that way for people, sadly. But
so I think it's been it's like a period out of that, just trying to figure out other ways to do it. And then, I don't know. I'm still trying to figure it out. My sense is that just especially the last 5-6 years, like I haven't written as much as I want, and I sort of feel like poetry never lets me down. Sometimes I feel like I let it down, but I go back to it. And I do feel like now, and maybe that's a good answer to what your question was, the evolution of it.
Yeah.
Maybe I feel like I need a silence or something, or a piece, like it's not like poetry is a meditative exercise necessarily, but something kind of like that, where it's like I feel like I need a certain kind of calmness to get into writing a poem. You know what I mean? And sometimes I feel like that's those ones I was telling you about that I write just before I go to bed. It's almost like sometimes I get exhausted and I trick myself into getting into that space and writing it and getting a certain part of your conscious brain out of it. So I don't know, but maybe it's that move from that extreme tension to a more quiet place. But I feel like it's always, I don't know how to put it. I feel like it's there waiting for me, So
yeah. In one way or another, it's there waiting for you.
Yes. Yeah.
It's either waiting for you, it's following you around.
Right.
That's interesting. Wow. That image of you as a little kid saying, okay, I'm going to write a story, but then get too into the language, and the story kind of goes away, and what you're left with is this kind of fascination with a certain description and a certain thing that language does. I mean, that is the poet,
right?
I would say poems are just the page of any novel you want to read again and again. You arrive at language in a certain way that begs repetition. You want to do it again and again, and that's what both reading and writing poetry is all about. And it's similar to music, of course, because I always say, no one has a favorite song they want to listen to once. You love a song, you want to hear it again and again. And poems, I think at their best, kind of move in that way.
Same thing.
So I can see from what you're describing, you recognizing that, of course, without recognizing it, but you're sensing that from the beginning almost. That's wild. But I certainly never knew about your early fame.
I thought I would have told you that story.
That is crazy.
So, he was very kind, very gracious.
That is so cool. Well, of course, you would imagine, you would hope for sure. About Kevin Young, I know Kevin a little bit and have known him for years, and admired him from the first moments of his career that I knew about, when his first book came out in the early 90s, and just such a remarkable person. But I keep you guys kind of together in my mind because you both have this encyclopedic kind of cultural knowledge and artistic knowledge. It all goes together. Popular culture, music, film. Kevin's so broad and deep with that. I always imagine you guys have a lot to talk about when you get together in those ways. But I'm wondering, when you say he kind of opened it up for you and transformed things, what can you say about? Because he was not he was pretty young then too, right?
Oh
I mean,
yeah,
he was here.
when he started teaching, he was probably 26. Or
Yeah,
something like that.
so
It was his first
right
job.
off of
Yeah.
Stegner, right out of
Yeah.
Harvard and Stanford, and back to here, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you remember about?
I mean, I
about
just
sitting with him in the
remember, I mean,
classroom.
and it was kind of beyond poetry too, because I think the first class I took with him was a film class,
Right,
you
yeah.
know, and then, I
Yeah.
just remember like we were just up in, you know, this was the 90s. So we were just up in the 7th floor of the UJ library in like the screening kind of room watching things, you know, I mean, that was like the best place to kind of watch films.
Right.
And all of a sudden it was just like, 'cause I mean, we were just watching, I mean, I think we watched like Oscar Michaud films, but then we also watched like Lifeboat by Hitchcock. And then all of a sudden we were watching like Night of the Living Dead and like Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song, you know, and like blaxploitation like
Yeah.
movies and stuff. And I was like, what? This is like, it was just blowing my mind
When
that this
Melvin
could.
Peoples just died.
I know,
RIP,
yeah. And they just put
Yeah.
out that beautiful box set from the Criterion
Awesome.
collection. Yeah, that I just got. And but it just, I don't know. It was just this thing of the just how much territory we covered, and the fact that we could like, you could actually talk about a zombie film, you know what I mean, or something like that, like in a college class. I just hadn't experienced that before. And I think that kind of, I still try to do that in my classes, and just try to have unexpected things, a wide range of things on there. And I think that's how I met him first. And then he was, you know, I think I'd maybe taken another poetry intro to class, poetry creative class with Coleman Barks, and then he was teaching one. And then I think I just got there, and he would just, you know, do things where, you know, he would, you know, I just remember he would have the assignment would be simple. You know, he'd be like, I want you to write a sonnet. But then he would show us, again, this crazy range of sonnets that would be from like, obviously like Shakespeare, like Elizabethan examples, to ones that were like Ted Berrigan's like scrambled, cut up sonnets, or sonnets that are the same line repeated like 14 times, or that had like math problems in it and like stuff like that. And it just was the same thing of just like, just showing you this range of things. And I think he just kind of, you know, recognized something in me and just and encouraged me. And I think also for me was just kind of like really the first like poet in the world that I identified as such, you know, like it was just like, okay, so this is, you know, how this would work. And I think he also just like, he was, I mean, you know, I haven't lived up to it, but he just was such a hard worker, and was just like, I felt like always writing poems, you know what I mean, at his time here. And I think that was just always this kind of like model of like productivity. But I think it was just also this like sense of that there was a poet here. I don't think I even knew what an MFA program was until he told me kind of about that. And I think just kind of, you know, he published a couple of like the earliest things that like I ever published, and like helped me with that too. But I think that was it. And then we've just kind of, you know, stayed friends. I mean, you know,
I mean, the history of poetry is certainly, contemporary poetry is also the history of teachers. So it's always interesting to hear a little bit about that. We don't have time for all of it, but you know, but a little bit is good. What else, man? I mean, I remember that last line, I love everybody, or by the Barber Street poem. That, talk a little bit about, you know, poetry in Athens. This book of yours that I'm dying for people to see is so full of that. You know, a lot of people's love for things, I think sometimes good poems and people's love don't go together too easily, because people aren't really willing to be honest to and about the things they love, and certainly the people they love. And poems require that kind of severe honesty. In whatever idiom it comes, it's got to be there, or else the poem isn't going to fly. I don't care. So, but you were able to, in these poems about Athens that I read about a year ago now, you were able to move so precisely and so lovingly in a way that I so rarely see in combination. Talk a little bit about like the time you've lived here, and how, you know, how you arrived to navigate that as in poems.
Yeah, and I think, you know, like I said, when I arrived here, I mean, you know, everyone looks back. I mean, I have my other Athens poem, The True Golden Era, talks about that cliche that I wrote this poem about, where everybody, no matter when you've been in Athens, someone's like, oh, you missed the work, you missed the best time.
Right.
It was like right
Right.
before you moved to town. That was
Right.
that was the true
You're the
golden
part of the
era.
people that ruined it. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And then it's just like I feel like I've lived through my own cycles of that, and then seeing people younger, older, and it's just like it seemed whenever the golden era of Athens was, you weren't there. You know
It's
what I
too
mean?
funny. And the place is called Athens, of all
right.
places.
Yeah. And so I kind of wrote about that, and then I think was kind of realizing like I said, it was just my time here in the late 90s. It was just intense for me. And I think, like I've talked about a lot, I was getting from, the university and from my classes there and from my exposure to poetry and kind of art and film through UGA. But then I was also going downtown 3-4 nights a week, like to see music, and there was just so much going on. And I was just kind of amazed by it. And I think I just took it for granted like a teenager when I was like, well, I guess this is going on in Tuscaloosa or Knoxville, Tennessee, or other college, and it wasn't. And I think it was like when I moved away from
Nashville,
here,
maybe, but not those.
right. But I think I just kind of took it for granted, and then moved away, and like I said, like lived in London for a bit, lived in Charlottesville and these other places. And I think a lot of those, the two that I read tonight, those early ones, were sort of looking back at that experience and trying to evaluate it when I wasn't here. I don't know if I would have been able to write them in the same way. And I think just situating them in a specific location, I think just sort of helped me. And then I felt like both those are kind of these composites of experiences that I was able to, because it was a location, just kind of get to that and almost make this kind of, palimpsest or crystalline kind of thing, where you're putting these layers of different experiences in it and kind of putting them in one poem, and where they were on the same plane or could kind of work together in that way. So,
and I imagine people.
Yeah.
The poems are populated with people, and then somehow they're rendered slightly anonymous, and I imagine most of these people you knew the names of, and and something about it, at least, if not very well. Because it's a small community, really. So how do you work that? I mean, how did you handle these people from back then arriving back in these poems?
I don't know, I just try to do them justice, I guess, and be fair and honest, but I think be loving to them too, because I think that Barber Street poem was especially, like I said, I don't know if it was a specific moment, a specific series of moments of these parties, that I went to at this place, and there was just this kind of just very, again, it's something that I don't know if it happens just because you're young, or if it's a specific location or something about the magic of Athens, or something, but there was this sense of just this incredible sense of community and belonging, and just kind of just that moment of just, I love you all, this is great. And just, we were all sort of there together. And I think looking back on that from a distance, was part of it. But I think that would be my answer, was with, if someone shows up, just try to remember them, or precisely and lovingly, like you said. I think, and that's, I think those are both those things are important to me to try to get into poems, especially about other people.
Deceptively difficult to do. Those poems remind me of those kind of Michael Ondaatje poems from like the 60s and 70s, about these friends of his in Toronto going to lakes and walking through rivers together, and he has that ability to be very precise, but also kind of almost trick you into experiencing what we think is the easy pleasure of friendship, which is often not very easy at all, and I think a lot more rare than we'd like to believe. But it's a kind of grace of commonness, which is not so common. But the poems do a wonderful job with it. Thank you so much for that. I want to ask you about the Prince poem. Of course, I remember that when you were going to that concert, and then the jet had to land halfway back, and then there was something happening, and then a couple of days later he was gone, and I'm still not over it.
I don't think I am either.
No, but just a little bit about, and I remember in the days after Prince was dead, one of the DJs in Atlanta just saying, "Look, I was at that thing with my phone on, and I'm playing this stuff," and they were just playing this bootleg, audio footage of the concert. What do you remember about being there that night? It's, I mean, it was probably hard to get back to the other side of him being dead and all that. But
I just remember how excited I was. I mean, just it was like I said, it was sort of like I said. I feel like Prince was just sort of one of my first conceptions of what a musician or a pop musician was, and like I just remember probably being 5, 6, 7, and like owning Purple Rain, and I think and my parents were alerted by Tipper Gore.
they were a little concerned.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I had to promise them not to listen to Darling Nikki, like that track, but I could listen to the rest of the album.
And it was spinning it backward. Remember all that stuff?
Right, exactly, yeah. So, but like I said, it was just a thing where like I just hadn't had a chance to see him, and then for me, and like I said, they announced it, and I was like, Prince with a piano and a microphone, that seemed totally wild, and I never imagined. Like I'd heard he'd done maybe a couple of shows like that before that tour, but not very many.
Oh, that tour, right?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and so that
He'd be famous for playing a big concert and then showing up somewhere and doing some set for 3 hours. Yeah.
I mean, one of my and you talk about bootlegs, and like I've been a huge bootleg collector in many formats, but I remember I got the one of my favorite Prince bootlegs is like that. It's like the after party, and he's like at like 4:30 in the morning somewhere, and he just opens with this like 15-minute version of like Just My Imagination.
That's the one.
That's
the concert that I missed. I left Paris that night. I was in Paris, July of 86.
Yeah. It's like a really famous bootleg. Like,
and I was supposed to go.
Yeah.
And I left that night on a plane. And my roommate, Debbie, one of my roommates at the time, don't ask, was named Debbie, and she was his manager's girlfriend.
Oh.
And she had tickets to this thing. And then when I got to Chicago and called back, they were like, "Oh yeah," and then we went to this after thing, and he played all night with a guitar. And then, it's one of my great Prince regrets. It's the one that got away,
Yeah.
But yeah, you were there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was like you said, like he'd done another tour. And I even think at one point when he was doing like the Vegas residency, like sometime like mid 2000s, I was like, maybe I go to Vegas to see Prince, but like it just didn't happen. And so this was just, I couldn't believe that and I got really good seats. Like I said,
you said like fifth row,
fifth row, something like that. And I mean, it was just so, I was just excited, I mean, like I couldn't believe it. And then I had these seats, and just remember the setup, it was this white piano. There was just this purple spotlight on it, and looking back on it, it all seems sort of funereal, in a way or something like that. But at the time I was so close to him that I couldn't, I was so excited, and I remember looking over and I saw I was on the same row in the middle, Janelle. I was like, I really have good seats.
Yeah, I mean, like tickets, right.
Yeah. And so she sat down, and I was looking over at her, and I was like, that's crazy. That's wild. But then I mean, when he went on, just the screams, you know what I mean?
Oh, wow.
Just the excitement, the exhilaration of it. And there was a scrim sort of behind, and he came out, and you just saw a shadow, and then he just kind of came out, and he had, like I said, that cane, you know what I mean? Or scepter, really, kind of more like, and like knowing what it was now, I mean, it was like, that was because he was in so much pain, you know what I mean? And his hips and his knees, and but he just had on these pajamas, right? I think it was, and there was like pillow. It just looked very comfortable, but it was also this thing where I think in the poem I say he's trying to force himself to be vulnerable, and I felt like there was just this. It took him a while to get to these moments, like I said, that were open, and then he would kind of revert back to these other things, you know what I mean? These moments, and I felt like some of that was like on the part of the crowd wanting one kind of thing or something. And I don't know, like some people have said like he, looking back on it, he knew this was going to be his last tour or something like that. I don't think so. I think he just maybe knew he was in bad health, and he wanted to do something kind of more stripped down. He couldn't perform in quite the same way. But my sense of it was that it was an amazing performer. You know what I mean? And he loves kind of being there. But then there was at moments this kind of sadness or distance or kind of vulnerability, in some of the songs, and like watching him negotiate that was.
Well, he might not have known, but the music knows.
Yeah.
And as a poet, that the work knows a lot more than we do. And part of the reason to do the work is to let it really teach us. It's not, now you don't write a poem, they have something in mind and write it down. You find it in the doing. And in ways, it's the only way you can find that thing. And you get kind of either convinced to that or attached to that, dependent on that in certain ways. And it takes you places you could have never gone without it. But it's always out in front of you. And I think I would be shocked if it wasn't the case that something about what Prince was facing was out in front of him coming through that music. No question about it. That's just the way it works, you know. And all artists are in that position in some ways. The greatest artists are in that position, I think, in a very radical way. And he was obviously one of the greatest artists plus performers, you know, which doesn't all the time go together. Did very well go together tonight, though, I must say. I don't know how much time we have. Are we a little bit more? Yeah, because I have one other thing I definitely want to ask you about. And that is about poetry and fatherhood. And you know, you're a new father, pretty new. Still in what, 3, 4?
She'll be 4 in January.
Yeah. Okay. So, how is that? Do you notice any shifts in how poems go and how the life of a poet? How does it change when the poet becomes a father? At least in your experience.
I think I'm still trying to negotiate that. You know what I mean? And I think like writing poems about children's difficult. You know what I mean? And I think I want to avoid sentimentality kind of in some way, but it's sort of inevitable, you know, on some level. And I feel like I tried to write some things about my daughter that were just, I realize it's not.
You can't. No.
It's getting too cutesy. And then I think I also want to kind of, I don't know, respect her in a way and her autonomy. So I think I'm honestly still trying to negotiate that, and finding the time, you know, is difficult. But she's one thing recently, I feel like just in the last few months, like she just started school for the first time in August. And I felt like, you know, she was supposed to go last year.
Right.
School never
this has been a
opened.
particular time for a parent too, the last couple of years.
Yeah. And I'm really thankful for the time I got to spend with her. But I do feel like once we put her in school, something about like her use of language or understanding of language has grown. And just like it's fun watching her. You know, I mean, I think about what Kenneth Koch did all that work, the New York poet, where like he has those compilations, or like the Rose, How'd You Get That Red, where he just went to schools, New York public schools in like 60s, 70s for years, and taught like, you know, Shakespeare, you know what I mean, and like really difficult modernist poems to kids, to school kids, public school kids in New York. And they understood them and were able to respond to them in this really fascinating way up to a certain age. I think I wasn't quite sure when it was, but it seemed like sometime in middle school, that natural poetic sensibility got sort of educated out of them, or
socially.
And so he wrote these. He has these great books that kind of talk about his experience with it, but he'll include like, you know, he'll have like a Robert Frost poem or something like that next to this poem by some 7-year-old like student in the Bronx or something, and there, you know, you can't even tell the difference between these, you know, sometimes, or like a Marianne Moore poem, and so I feel like I'm watching my daughter discover language, or discover how to talk in metaphors or images in this way, and I'm hoping something will come out of that. And then as I lost my father about a year ago. And so I think that just when I became a father, I think it made me think about my relationship with my father in a totally different way. You know what I mean? And sort of reevaluate that. And so I think I've kind of I think I don't know, there's certain human relationships and that I feel like you need poems to sort out, and I think that's kind of one of them, and I think I'm still trying to negotiate that, and I feel like it's connected to
I imagine
like me as a father to my daughter and so forth. So it's a lot, you know? And I think there's not many, a lot of the fathers and a lot of American poems aren't pleasant, so it's like you got to look for sometimes other models. There's good ones. Think of Robert Hayden, Those Winter Sundays.
That's a pretty good one. That's a pretty good one. Even My Father's Love Letters. You know, it's honest, but it's loving. You know, and it's certainly accurate and incredible. It's out there.
But I think what you're talking about is something that in the work I got to write, I think I'm gonna have to
Yeah,
navigate
well,
that and
that's
negotiate
interesting you
it.
say that, because it's absolutely true that in one's own parenting is an encounter with our parents,
Yeah.
which is unlike anything else and couldn't
Right.
happen any other way.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
the things you do as a parent, you re-encounter your experience with your parents in ways that are so direct and shocking and moving and,
Yeah.
and revealing.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think one of the
yeah.
things that I like, again, kind of maybe back to your first question, this will bring it all back home in a way, was poetry for me. It's this way it can contain all these things
Yeah, it
in a
can
way
go-
that not for me, not much other types of language or writing or art can. And I have come to kind of realize that. And sort of there's things otherwise I don't know if I'd be able to get grapple with. And I feel like poetry can let these things sit side by side with
Yeah.
each other that otherwise are hard to get next to each other in really rewarding kind of ways, you know what I
Right.
mean? And they create something instead of just, you know, like, instead of a friction, you know what I mean? Like it makes something.
Yeah.
So that's
No,
great.
that's absolutely
unexpected.
right.
So, yeah.
That's right. Well, you do it beautifully, man.
Yeah.
We're looking forward to more.
Well, thank you so much
Yeah.
for talking to me.
Yeah,
I really
well, this is what it
appreciate
took, Jeff.
Yeah, it took a couple of years and a pandemic and
An
also,
empty
but-
museum.
Yeah,
Here
yeah.
we are.
But here we are. Yeah, for
Yeah.
this painting. This is great.
Cool.
So
Well, thank you.
thank you, Ed. I
My
appreciate it.
man.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank everybody for listening.
All right, thank you.